Hello, it is Jan Fran, and welcome to the very first episode of Jan Fran Has Issues. If you have come here from my Instagram, you'll already have a bit of a vibe of who I am and what I'm about. Thank you so much for following me here. I love ya. If you have just stumbled onto this interview via a podcast app or you're watching it on YouTube or Facebook, this is my full interview with Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, aka Beast from the Middle East. Dr. Mo, some of you might know, is an emergency medicine physician who's done 2 stints in Gaza with the Palestinian Australian New Zealand Medical Association, or PANSMA. You might have seen him all over social media just recounting some of the most horrific things that he has seen and experienced in Gaza. And a part of having him on this show was really to amplify his message. I do struggle to keep it together during this interview. I'm not going to tell you that it's an easy listen. It's not. I don't particularly like crying in public, but I think at this point, if you're not moved by what he has to say, then I don't know, that might be a slightly bigger problem than crying about it. I won't say too much more, except that I was intending to do a slightly more extended introduction to Jan Fran Has Issues, just explaining a little bit more about what this podcast series is about, but I did want to put this episode out pretty quickly, so I'm just going to save that for a later date. The last thing, and I know it's annoying because everybody asks, but it really, really does help when you like and subscribe, especially if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you could rate and review this podcast on whatever podcast app you're listening to it on, it really is a zero-cost way to help this podcast /vodcast get seen and heard by more people. And it's so appreciated by me. So thank you so much in advance for doing that. And here is my chat with Dr. Mo. Dr. Mo, thanks so much for joining us on Jan Fran Has Issues. I'm so happy that you've come here to have a conversation with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And I really appreciate you taking the time out to do that, because I know that you're very busy.
Yeah, there's been a lot going on.
Yeah, there's been a few things going on.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into all of that, but I kind of just wanted to start a little bit with you, because I got to be completely honest. I'm thrown somewhat by the British accent.
Yep.
So can you just tell me a little bit about how you've ended up here? I mean, not here specifically, but here in
Australia.
Australia.
So I was born in Mecca.
Okay.
And I moved to the UK when I was about 4 years old. Grew up in the north of England. Went to university in Liverpool. So because of that, I've got a thick northern accent.
Yes.
And I moved to Australia about 8 years ago, and I've been working as a doctor since then. Part of the reason why I moved was because of, the sunshine, the better working conditions, and one of actually the main reasons was because I wanted to be an emergency physician, and the emergency training here in Australia is way better than the UK, and I wanted to be the best doctor that I could be. So that's part of the reason why I moved as well.
Okay. And you're Palestinian background, isn't it? Your Palestinian heritage?
Yeah. My dad was actually born in Gaza, and my mother's born in Jordan, but she's from Hebron originally.
She was born where, sorry?
In Jordan.
Okay, in Jordan.
But she's from Hebron originally.
Okay.
Which is in the West Bank.
Yes. When you said you were born in Mecca, and I knew that you had Palestinian heritage, it's sadly not surprising to be born outside of Palestine with Palestinian heritage.
It's very classic. Classic of the diaspora. There's a lot of us.
Yeah. 1
in 3 refugees, I think, before the Syrian war around the world, 1 in 3 was Palestinian.
Right. Okay.
So yeah.
Speaks to a slightly wider issue that may or may not have been happening for quite some time.
Yes, indeed.
So you moved to the UK when you're 4 with your family. You were only child, or you got siblings?
No. My mum, dad, and at the time my 2 sisters. But there's 6 of us now. There's 6 kids.
Okay.
My mum and dad. So there's 8 of us in total in the family. So it's pretty big.
Okay. And
we need more than 1 car to get anywhere. Yeah.
What were you driving at the time? You needed a minibus.
Yeah. So we'd have like a 7-seater, and then, one of us would always not go.
Okay.
And usually it'd be me, because I'd always be doing my own thing.
Okay.
I'm a little bit different.
Are you black sheep?
I wouldn't say the black sheep. I don't think we have a black sheep in the family. I think we have more of the joker, the non-conforming Arab son.
Okay, and that's you in the family.
Well, yeah. I mean, I used to play rugby, and I played rugby at a high level. I played professionally, and obviously, an Arab family from the Middle East, they don't have no idea what rugby is. And, sport is not usually something that they support. It's more the education that they support. So, when I signed my first professional rugby contract, I didn't even tell my parents. I just signed it, and, they found out. I think my dad watched me once on TV, and that's how he knew that I was playing professional rugby.
That's wild.
Yeah. But that's just the way you've got to do it sometimes.
Just seek forgiveness, not permission.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's how it works.
You turned it around, though. I mean, you did become a doctor.
Yeah. I mean, they're still my parents.
Yeah.
So I've still got to get things done.
Yeah. I mean, I'm, like my background's Lebanese, and I always say like to win in your parents' eyes, it goes lawyer, doctor, married.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
you know what I mean? So, hey, you've got one of, well, maybe two or three, I don't know.
Yeah, because the options are doctor, engineer, lawyer, disgrace. Yes. Those are the options. So
yes.
Yeah, the rugby player wasn't on there, so I just had to tick at least one of the boxes.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think I don't think you're a disgrace if that means anything. Somehow, I don't think your parents think you're a disgrace either. But again,
I hope not.
I hope not. I don't know. I never met them. But on that question though, because obviously you have been to Gaza a number of times.
Yes.
I think twice you've only just
twice
recently
during
returned.
This war. Yeah.
During this war. War. What?
Yeah.
Genocide.
Yeah.
There's not really any appropriate language really to describe what is happening currently there.
Yeah.
But you've been on sort of two medical missions.
Yes.
I'm kind of interested to know about that moment where you decided you were going to go on the first one. What made you do that? What was the thinking there for you?
Well, this was about 9 months into it, and you would think that it would stop.
Yeah.
The images that you were seeing, the hospitals being bombed, the schools being bombed, the children that were being pulled out from the rubble, crushed, limbs missing, heads missing, 80% body, but we were seeing all of this for 9 months, and you would think at some stage the world would have to step in and stop what's going on here, but they didn't. And I felt like I've got to do something. I can't. I'm sharing stuff online and all the rest of it like everybody else, but I got to physically do something. So I started applying to different NGOs to go. I was already part of MSF, but MSF were like, we're not going to take anybody unless they've done a number of missions because Gaza is so dangerous, and we need you to be very experienced in this kind of line of work. So I ended up going with other organizations, and I went there to help, to try and lighten the load on these people, on these poor people in Gaza.
But what made you want to undertake that rather than, say, advocating back home or trying to move things politically from a distance, or the sort of myriad of other things that you could have possibly done? What was it about that in particular that you felt that you needed to do?
Because I'm a doctor. I have a skill set. I have a knowledge set that I'm able to utilize. That's helpful in that situation. So, what's the most effective thing that I can do? Well, the most effective thing I can do is do what I do every day, which is be a doctor. So instead of becoming like, some kind of activist or anything like that, let's just go over there and be a doctor and start healing people. That's what I do every day. That's what I get paid for. Let's do that first. And obviously it's morphed from that to other things, but that's what I'm best at. And what would be the most helpful. And that's what I went in with.
Yeah. So when you said that you were applying via various organizations, which one did you eventually end up going with, and how does the logistics of all of that work?
Yeah.
So from start to end.
Yeah. So it's quite difficult to get into Gaza. You have to apply through different NGOs. Once you get past the NGO, phase where they interview you or they're happy with you to go, your application goes to the United Nations and World Health Organizations. Then they give you a tick. Then after that, it has to be cleared through COGAT, which is the Israeli security force that that controls what goes in and out of Gaza, including the aid and the aid workers. And as the war has progressed, the rules have changed and how they give you clearances has changed. So the first time I went, we had clearance, 2 weeks before we went into Gaza. We had clearance from COGAT to go in. This time round, the clearance is 5 hours before the bus leaves Jordan. Okay. So we had my team this time around. I went with Panzima. We had a team of 4.
Panzima is what's the?
So Panzima is a non-profit organisation, and it's an Australian non-profit organisation. It's the Palestinian, Australian and New Zealand Medical Association. So they're a non-profit organisation that does medical missions and supplies medical supplies and supports clinics on the ground in Gaza. So I went with them the second time round, but we had a team of 4. Only 2 of us ended up going in. One of the doctors was a doctor from Ireland who, at 1 o'clock in the morning, bus leaves at 6, 1 o'clock in the morning, he got the message that he wasn't cleared to go.
Why? Do you know why?
So a lot of the times, people that aren't cleared to go tend to be surgeons, and they tend to not allow surgeons in. So
Why would they not allow surgeons in?
because surgeons can save critically, say as a physician, right, or as an emergency doctor, I can stabilize a patient, but once he's stabilized, that arm either needs to be amputated or it needs to be fixed. The burnt skin needs to be cleaned. It needs to have skin grafts. This needs plastic surgeons. It needs orthopedic surgeons. So to actually save someone's life after you've stabilized them, we need surgeons. And they're the ones that have the high skill level that they can't get in Gaza. So they stop the surgeons going in.
So they stop the profession that can save people's lives the most from going in.
Yeah, that's one of the big things is most of the people that go in to Gaza are not surgeons. Most of the doctors that are going in are not surgeons. It's very hard for surgeons to get in. And it's very random. There's no reason why they'll give you for you.
How's that okay? How's that a thing? How's that okay?
I mean, it's extremely frustrating because also as well it destroys the plans when you're going in with. So if you have like an oncology surgeon who's there to perform surgery on cancer patients, he might have coordinated, or the NGO might have coordinated with the doctors on the ground which patients need to come and see him and which surgeries he's going to do. But if he's only told 5 hours before he's meant to go in whether he's allowed in or not, those cancer patients might not get the surgery that they need. So it's very hard to coordinate because you could do all of this coordination and hard work and make sure everyone's going to be at the right place at the right time. And then 5 hours before he goes in, it's all gone. And it becomes hard as well to coordinate as a team. When I was there was an organization called Rahma, and they were bringing in 20 doctors. And of the 20 doctors, only 8 got in. 12 got rejected at the 5 hours, 6 hours before departure.
And is there a reason given on paper?
No, there's no reason given. They don't give you a reason or anything like that. You don't know why it's happened. Just it is what it is.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's very frustrating and very, very difficult because you could coordinate and have an ICU nurse and an ICU doctor, and you can have a scrub nurse with a surgeon, and they're meant to work together, but one of them gets in, the other one doesn't. Do you know what I mean?
Then the whole operation
yeah.
So
you can still provide some level of decent healthcare. You can still have good outcomes. You can still save lives, but it's not going to be at the same level that if you were going as a full team that you'd prepared and had 2 weeks or whatever, knowing who's going to go in, what's going to go in, and coordinating things. That doesn't happen.
Okay. So you were allowed in. Are you given a reason for why you're allowed in, or you just yes or no, you're in?
Well, I think sometimes they probably allowed me in because they were like, oh, he's an emergency doctor, so even if he does stabilize them, so what? And also as well, like as I'm an emergency physician trainee, so I'm not a consultant. And sometimes they look at that, they don't want, people who are top of their fields or anything like that to come in, so that was part of the reason. But I'm also, dealt with war zones before and have a lot of experience in this kind of stuff. And
what war zones had you been in?
Well, I worked in refugee camps before,
okay.
And things like that, and dealt with similar infectious diseases and things like that. I've worked in rural Australia for many years, where there's no blood works, no pathology labs, no CT scanners, where I'm the only doctor, has to be able to do all the procedures and things like that. So I've got a lot of experience working in that kind of environment, which translates really well to working somewhere like Palestine.
How does Gaza compare to?
There's no comparison. There is no comparison. I remember the first night that the bombs went off, when the ceasefire broke, and it was about 1:30 in the morning, and the whole room was shaking. And it was just like a dozen bombs going off in 5 minutes, and we were quite scared because We were like, what's going on here? The room's shaking, the window's blown in off its hinges. It was really intense, and we knew that the ceasefire definitely was broken. Or this was a resumption of the war, because this wasn't one or two. This was literally dozens of bombs, and you could hear the screams of women and children from like miles. I mean, there was just so much noise, and we composed ourselves and went down to the emergency department, and within about 30-40 minutes, the emergency department was full, to this point of which where we couldn't actually fit any more patients in the emergency department, even on the floor. So we actually were seeing people out on the streets of the hospital. Like, we were seeing them out on the streets, and we'd run out of analgesia pretty much almost within the first 30 minutes, whatever little we had, and we'd run out of sedation. So, I was outside on the streets cutting children's chests open to put in chest drains with no analgesia, no sedation.
Sorry, analgesia is anesthetic?
Painkillers.
Painkillers, yeah.
No painkillers, no anesthetic, a knife in my hand, cutting children's chests open and putting a chest tube in. And when they have these traumatic chest injuries, you need a big chest tube in. So you need to have a big hole in. Sometimes you need to put your finger in as well, put the finger inside their chest, open it up and put the tube in. And the children are conscious when you're doing that. And there's no sedation or painkillers, and you're doing that, and you can hear them scream. And they're grabbing your hand because they want you to stop, but you have to keep going. And it's very, very hard to do that to a child. But we had to do that to dozens of children. Yeah.
I really thought maybe I would try and get through this interview without crying, but it's actually very difficult to hear.
Yeah.
I don't know how you're so composed. You've seen it. You've been there.
I've cried so many times, and look, I'm I'll probably tear up and cry as well. But I have to live with that. Do you know? I have to live with that, and I have to live with what I did to those children, and it's very hard. I have to live with the decisions I made about which children I left to bleed to death and which children I chose to try and save. And I have to live with that. And it eats me up inside every day. But it's part of the reason why I'm on the campaign trail to get something done. Because I don't want anyone else to have to go through that, and I don't want the children to have to go through that. But, it got to a stage where, I had with me, because I'm prepared for these mass casualty events, is I had some ketamine. I had 2 syringes of ketamine, and that was my sedation. And I had to pick and choose who to give the sedation to and who not to give the sedation to. And ketamine can also be used as a painkiller as well as a sedative. And
how do you even make that decision?
The thought process, I just was very pragmatic, right? The thought process was, if I knew this child was going to die, even if they're in agony and in pain, I wouldn't give them the ketamine. And the reason was because the children that could live, I didn't want to traumatize them for the rest of their lives with what I was about to do to them. So I would sedate them, and I would leave those other children to die. But that's the decisions that you had to make when you were in Gaza. Every day.
I mean, part of this, there's a certain absurdity to this. I'm sorry, I have to say, like, 2 people sitting here, talking about this as though it's something that's happening and something that we're reflecting on. I mean, this is fucking insane.
Yeah.
It's insanity.
Yeah, it is.
It's unfathomable. It's unconscionable. And I don't understand how the world hasn't moved to stop it. I just don't understand. And I thought that I was quite a worldly person, Dr. Mo, and I evidently am not, because I'm really failing to understand.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
The thing that really, when you go through a night like that, because it was one of the most horrific nights, probably the most horrific night of my life, that first night where the ceasefire broke. But I remember because there's one CT scanner, and it's, located 100 meters away. And obviously the beds are all broken. Sometimes the wheel doesn't work very well, so you can't wheel people to the CT scanner, or not all the beds can. So I would be holding people like this, holding their chest drain and running to the CT scanner because I need to get them down onto the CT scanner, and I would then run back and start seeing other patients because there was only about 12 doctors and there was about, 300, 400, 500 patients, all, dying, injured, missing limbs, burns, and there was only 12 of us, and there was a handful of nurses, and that was it. But we also needed to move patients around, to the CT scanner and back. So, that's when the fitness came in, and I was just running back and forth and carrying people. But I remember, this man that I'd put a chest drain in, I put the chest drain in him outside the hospital because the hospital was so full, and I put him on the CT scanner to scan him, and he died on the CT scanner. And we didn't even have any time to, move him into a room or anything like that. So we just picked him up and just put him on the floor and brought the next person in, and he was just dead on the floor. And I remember going back to the emergency room and seeing more patients and more children and things like that. And I took back some more patients. And by the time I got back in the CT scanner room, there was like 4 bodies just on the floor that were dead. And these were people who died either just immediately after or while they were having a CT scan. And there's only one CT scanner in the whole north of Gaza. So, you get a mass casualty event of 300-400 people. Most of them need a CT scan from, shrapnel and things like that. And they're all waiting for a CT scanner. And it's not even in the hospital. It's just in a building away from the hospital. People just die waiting for a CT scanner. They die on the CT scanner. And I just remember the lack of dignity that these people have, that we would just literally, if it was a dead body, we would just literally push it over and put the next person on. And I was like, these are human beings, but we're just, and it's just insane. Like, I was just thinking to myself, like, we can't even give someone a bit of dignity when they die. Like, these people are living without dignity right now. They live in open sewers, in tents, no food, no water. Women in Gaza are shaving their entire hair off because of head lice. Children are covered in scabies. And then when they die, we just throw their bodies on the floor and move on to the next one. And I think one of the things that really stuck with me was, I remember it was during the day, it was the afternoon, and there was a missile strike, and this man brought in his children who had been hit by a missile. And because there's, no fuel, so there's no cars transporting people, people were coming to hospital on a donkey cart. And this donkey cart pulled up, and, he was screaming, the mother was screaming, and we opened up the blankets. One of the children had a head missing, the other one's arm was hanging off, 2 of them were still alive, and he was screaming for help for them. And the donkey that brought them in started urinating, and the urine splashed back and went all over these children. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, imagine being the father where your child has a missing head, the other one is hanging on, breathing for life, and this donkey is just urinating all over the children. That's how degraded, that's how dehumanized these people are. And when you see it, and then you bring them into the emergency department, and, you've got a 15, 20-year-old bed that doesn't work that you put them on. There isn't even a mattress on the bed. It's just the metal. We just put the child down on the metal. And the child could be bleeding out to death. No analgesia, no anesthetic. Do you know? I'm just like, where's the humanity left? Like, we can't even just bring in a blanket for them. Even a blanket, like, just to keep them warm while they die. It was... And that's the reality. And I think sometimes, people look at the Palestine, the Gaza, this conflict, and they look at it from this political lens. But, like, when you're down there on the ground and you just see countless children and women and burnt alive, bleeding to death every day, it's very difficult to see this in any other way other than this is a humanitarian crisis.
I mean, it's, you say, like, this is the reality. But it's this isn't a natural disaster.
No, it's not.
Right? It's not a terrible flood.
Yeah.
It's not a wildfire.
Yeah.
This is man-made.
Mm-mm.
somebody is doing this.
Yeah.
And that is the reality.
Yeah.
And I think we have to reckon with that.
Yeah.
So yes, we can say that it is a humanitarian disaster because it absolutely is.
Yeah.
But it's a man-made humanitarian
Yeah.
disaster.
Yeah.
Who is doing it?
Yep. Yep.
And who is refusing
Yeah.
to stop it?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yep.
These are the big questions.
Well, when you frame something, the way you frame something is very important. Because if like I was saying, I'm trying to frame this from a humanitarian point of view because I want to humanize these people. We have these people when they die, dogs on the streets are eating their bodies, and I saw that the first time I went in. As we drove in, there was bodies on the floor and dogs eating their bodies, children being urinated on as they're taking their last breaths. People, when they die, they're just thrown to one side and the next person is brought in. There's no humanity even in the way that they're dying. And I'm trying to center it around the humanity of these people. The framing, though, of them is they're collateral. They die. They're not
Their
being
deaths
killed.
are inevitable.
Inevitable, but it's not. When the fuel's cut off and a donkey brings in dead and injured children and it urinates on them, there's a reason why that happened, and that's because there's no fuel. That's because the ambulances are being destroyed, paramedics are being killed. When children come in and they're dying from a simple infection, it's because of starvation. Their immune system has completely been destroyed. They've got stunted growth. I mean, all of these things are all factors. There's a reason why all of these things are happening.
What's the reason?
Well, the reason is quite simple. The reason is this blockade, illegal blockade, this collective punishment, the taking of 2 million hostages in Gaza. Because, when you starve an entire population of food, water, electricity, medical care, that's them being taken hostage. They're now all hostages, and that's the way I see them. I see the same humanity in those hostages as I do the Israeli hostages. They're all hostages. And those airstrikes and that starvation is actually affecting them both. And I think that's what people should understand. Those airstrikes don't just kill Palestinian babies. They kill the hostages as well. They kill the Israeli hostages as well. And the issue is that when you have a situation where more children are killed in 1 hour, when they broke that initial ceasefire, when more children are killed in 1 hour than the entire Russia-Ukraine conflict of 3 years combined, the conversation needs to be centered around that. It needs to be centered around their humanity, because their humanity has gone. You can't justify killing that many children in an hour, no matter what your objective is. And there were plenty of times when we were in Gaza that we would have mass casualty events that was exclusively just women and children. And I think the UN just released a report saying that since the ceasefire broke, they have recorded 35 incidences of airstrikes that were just women and children casualties. We used to see that all the time. So where's the justification? Where's the justification for this?
You can't justify that.
No, you can't.
That's impossible. There's no justification for that.
There's no justification for the last 75 years of occupation and the taking away of right of self-determination. There's no justifying that, but these people have been so dehumanized that we've got to a stage where they can die on the streets, they can die from starvation, and we still have a conversation where we center the humanity of Israeli hostages, and we don't center on the same page, on the same level. We don't center the reality of these 1 million children in Gaza. We don't center their humanity. How can it be justified to kill 200 children in an hour to release 35 hostages? And you've not released them. They're still bombing every day. Still another 100. I think on average is about 112 deaths a day in Gaza since the break of the ceasefire. So where's the justification? Do you know what I mean? Where's the justification? Where's the humanity? And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to center the humanity of these children and these people in Gaza, the women and the men and the families. because the moment that we humanize them again, then their lives become important and they become equal, and then we can't justify killing 200 children in 1 hour. But if we can't humanize them, if we can't get people to see them as humans, then we can never stop the bombs.
I mean, you have a situation where an ABC's presenter is fired for posting a Human Rights Watch post about Israel using starvation as a weapon of war in late 2023, which we now know the evidence has shown has happened time and time and time and time and time again since. Right? So the consequences of censoring Palestinians and insisting upon their humanity are very high for people who are trying to do that work. And so if you're somebody that is saying that we must bring back the humanity because it has been stripped, how do you do that in a setting where it's incredibly difficult and criminalized in some instances to do so?
Well, I think you have to be brave. And I think you have to make some sacrifices. No one said it was going to be easy, We're looking at similar to what happened in the 1930s and 1940s to people in World War II, to Jewish people in World War II, where, a lot of people say that they would have hidden their Jewish neighbor in their house. But would you really, knowing the consequences of what could have happened, you could have been executed for doing that? Would you really be able to take that risk? Well, we're seeing that right now. If you stand up for Palestinian humanity and just say, hey, look, starving children is wrong and you could lose your job for that. It's the same thing. Are you willing to do that? You have to be able to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. And that's where we're at right now. That's where we're at. One day, those journalists that were fired, those doctors that lost their jobs, those aid workers that were killed, like Zomi, one day they're going to be our heroes. One day books will be written about them. But until that day comes, we have to keep being brave and we have to keep going, because when journalists lose their jobs for reporting the truth or reporting the reality on the ground, that shows me that that the narrative, they're beginning to lose control of the narrative. And because of that, you're seeing extreme measures all around the world. You're seeing students in America being kidnapped on the streets and deported without charge. And, that's causing a lot of issues as well. So all of these things are happening to silence and, again, dehumanize the Palestinian people. But I think the tide is turning. I really do. And I think...
What is giving you that impression? Why do you think that?
Because anything, when you get to this stage where you're committing a genocide, when you get to the stage of censoring journalists, when you get to a stage of passing new laws to
stifle protests,
and deport people and stuff like that, that usually spells the beginning of the end, because that is a sign of losing control. This never started on October the 7th. This started before October the 7th. And, before then, I think it was something like 260 people in the West Bank had been killed that year alone. 60 or 70 of them were children. That was
I think 2023 was the deadliest year on record for children in the West Bank, and that was before October 7th.
Yeah, it's the deadliest year since the Intifada. It was the deadliest year. And, that just goes to show you that, like, this was always happening. But no one was paying attention and nobody really cared. And they weren't censoring protests then or censoring students or deporting people. But now they are, which means that the narrative has gone and people are beginning to see what's going on. And, now you've got the ICC arrest warrants, you've got the ICJ case of probable genocide and things like that. So, this usually means that hopefully we'll see justice for the Palestinian people.
Was there a moment when you were in Gaza where you thought you were going to die?
Yeah, there were a lot. It's not safe. It really is not safe. There were a lot of times I didn't feel safe when I was in Gaza. And some of the times it was, we had to take risks to save patients. And that's why it wasn't safe. And sometimes it was just out of our hands and out of control, that we just, the hospital would be bombed while we were in it. And the facilities around the hospital would be bombed. So you can't run, and you got to stay where you are. And you're just like, is this next bomb going to drop where I am or not? So that happened when we were there. And that was a scary moment.
I mean, are you losing your shit in that moment, or are you
Well,
cool?
you want to, I definitely wanted to, but the Palestinian doctors that were there and the Gaza doctors, they were just, because they're so used to it, and a lot of them have seen their family killed in front of them, and some of them have even survived airstrikes themselves, and they've got shrapnel injuries, old shrapnel injuries. There was a nurse that we had that had an amputated leg, but he was still working, and for them, they were just like, if this is our time to die, it's our time to die. People are so accepting of death now as just normal over there because of the amount of death that you see. So, they weren't running away. So I was like, why should I run away? We might as well just all stay here. And if we all go out together, then we all go out together, but at least we were going out trying to save lives, doing our job, and I thought, if that's the way you go, that's the way you go. Everyone's got to die someday, everyone's got to die. If I'm dying trying to save some children, then, what a great death that is. And that's the way I just used to think about it. I used to just think, I'm going to die in Ramadan, helping children. It's not a bad way to go.
What was Ramadan like over there?
That was also quite a difficult one as well, because the bombings would be, the intensity of the bombing would increase when it was iftar time, which was time to break your fast, and suhoor time, when it was time to have something to eat before you start your fast. And the reason for that was because people would gather when they would break their fast, so families would get together to eat together, because that was the first meal of the day, when people would break their fast, and that's when the bombing would start.
When people are congregating.
And it would increase in the casualty numbers. So, I always knew that they would come. They wouldn't come straight away, because the ambulances would have to go out and get them. So I knew they would come within about 15, 20 minutes. We would get quite a few people that would come in from, airstrikes. And that way I was like, right, I've got 15 minutes to eat and get down to the ER, because we're going to be busy for the next couple of hours. It was like that every day.
What's the sort of coping strategy there for you? It seems almost comical, that these days it's like, well, maybe doing a bit of meditation might be, maybe looking after your self-care. Why don't you go for a hike? I mean, this is farcical in that context, But surely
there isn't. I mean, I remember, walking through the wards at night, and people would be screaming, at night, and they would be screaming because they have PTSD. It would be children waking up and screaming. It would be adults screaming. And these were people that saw their whole family like blown up in front of them, and then they were burnt alive, and they've got burns to their face and things like that. And they would be reliving the horrors of that. And we have no sedation. So you would hear children screaming at night because they could hear the drone, and they would be scared that the drone was going to come and hit them again. And that was just walking through the wards. You'd walk through the wards and you'd hear screams of children and crying. And, this is at 2-3 o'clock in the morning. So this is a very traumatized population right now. And how do you cope? Well, they're obviously not coping. They're just surviving. And like I say, there's a real indifference to death in Gaza, even from children. I remember like when you would see children, and, there was, because I'd been there before, I had families that would come and bring me sweets because I looked after them, and they knew I was back in Gaza. So they would come to the hospital and they would have baked me some goods. And, I was always like, please don't do this. It's so dangerous. Like, I don't want you to risk your life just so you can give me some pastries. Like, please, like, I'm good. You know what I mean? Your safety is more paramount. Don't be traveling, when it's not safe. But they were like, no, we wanted to do this, that, and the other. And, the airstrikes were happening in their area. And I just said, why not just evacuate to like a little bit in a slightly safer place? And the little girl, she was about 6 years old. She's called Melike. And she just said, I'd just rather die in my home. She goes, I'm sick and tired of camping. I'd rather just die in my house. She's 8 years old and she was just completely indifferent about where she dies. That's how traumatized that population is. You know, this hasn't been going on for a few weeks. It's been going on for 2 years. This is... And, you know, even when we were there was like drones, quadcopters that would come down to like street level and they would play sounds of children crying or women screaming. And it would just be quite like, you know, you'd hear it from your room of just like this babies crying. And, you know, they're armed, these quadcopters are armed with guns and grenades and missiles. And they would make those kind of sounds, which would be petrifying because all you would hear is just screams of children all night. And it would just be the quadcopter just circling around, just playing noises.
So what is that, just like psychological
It is psychological,
warfare?
yeah. And sometimes, you know, the quadcopters would come down and they would say...
God, what is this level of cruelty?
Yeah.
I don't understand. Again, maybe I'm just the dumbest bitch in the world. I don't know. I just don't understand what that level of cruelty is.
Yeah, I mean...
The not letting in of surgeons because they're the ones that can save lives. The waiting until all of the people congregate for Ramadan because that's when you'll get the most people together in the one space.
Yeah.
Playing the sounds of women and children screaming just so people can hear women and children screaming. I mean, it doesn't...
Yeah, it's all...
It just doesn't register in the human mind. I can't fathom it at all.
Honestly, when you're there, you I don't think there's ever been an aid worker that's left Gaza that's not said this is the worst thing they've ever seen in their life. You know, there's every angle. There's the blocking of the food, the blocking of the medicine, no electricity, not allowed to evacuate children out of Gaza. Or, you know, the children that we do evacuate, it's a very low number. You know, when you injure 100 children a day and you only allow one child to be evacuated, do you know what I mean? It begins to add up how many children are I think. So you see some of the most horrific things. Honestly, it's so difficult working there. It's so difficult, the things that you experience. And like I say, everybody that leaves, every aid worker, it's not just me saying this, every aid worker that's gone in there and left has said the same thing, which is, this is the worst thing they've ever seen. From the psychological warfare, you know, they drop leaflets all the time. You know, people bring you leaflets and, you know, on the leaflets it says that, like, you know, they have quotes from the Quran sometimes, quoting the Quran against them, saying, you know, this is what your own book says. You know what I mean? And there was, you know, these quadcopters. I'd spoken to some patients and they were saying that the quadcopters came down and they would say to them, or they would shout on the thing in Arabic, they would say that the Arabs have abandoned you. They give us money and weapons to kill you, and they just send you your shroods, like the white cloth to be buried in. They send you that and they give us the money and weapons. Just to break them psychologically, you know. So yeah, like it's a lot, like from every angle these people are suffering, from the psychological warfare to the starvation, to the destroying of their homes, to the constant picking up, packing your stuff and moving. They're just suffering from every way imaginable. And I just think, like, you know, we wouldn't treat dogs like this. We wouldn't treat dogs like this. If 200 dogs were killed in an hour with them blown to pieces, there would have been more condemnation and more outrage in the world than those children in Gaza that were killed.
I just don't understand why people don't give a shit. I mean, that's not true, and I want to recognize. Obviously, there's a lot of people who do. That is true. But given the scale, and given what we know, and given what we've seen, and given what has been established as fact, and what is evidence based before our eyes, the silence is. I find it just mystifying and suffocating.
People care, but people are scared to talk, and. You know, we've got to move into a phase where we can frame the reality of what's going on in Gaza. And the reality of what's going on in Gaza is that children are dying in the most horrific ways that we've never seen before. You know, we've never seen, you know, this is like medieval level barbarity that's been inflicted on these people. If we frame the story better, if we frame the reality better, then we can bring back some humanity to these children, and then hopefully that can lead to the bombs being stopped.
What do you mean when you say we frame the story and the reality better? What do you mean by that?
Well, when 200 Palestinian children get killed, we say that they died by a strike or by a blast. The headlines are
lost their lives.
Lost their lives, yeah. We don't say that they were slaughtered, but they are slaughtered. I've seen it. I've seen their heads blown off. I've seen the limbs blown off. I've seen them bleed to death. They're slaughtered. I've seen them come in as a melted pile of flesh. I've got so many pictures like that of just, these bodies that are just completely disintegrated. And I look at that and I go, they didn't die. They didn't die. When you see that, you know that this is not dying. This is slaughter, mass slaughter. When a child's head's blown off from the blast and you have to put it in a body bag, it hits you different when you pick up a 3-year-old kid and the head's missing and you're putting it in a body bag. So if we can't even just describe the reality of what's going on, then we can never win over the people in the middle and the people on the other side. So we've got to frame it better, and we've got to center it around the humanity of these people. We've got to give them back their humanity, because you can't
just on the framing.
Yeah.
Just before we wrap that point up.
Yeah.
You're talking about that kind of like lost their lives, died.
Yeah.
And that's very passive language, and that's something that I think has been called out by a number of people, myself included, about the way in which we talk about Palestinians. I mean, how much of a, I guess, culpability or complicity do you think that the media has? What sort of role do you think it's playing in all of this?
I think if you look back at history, any point in history, any war that started, there's been a lot of lying. Like the Iraq War, the Gulf Wars, the Vietnam War. If the media was honest, it would have held more people accountable. Saddam Hussein didn't have weapons of mass destruction, yet we went in there, and because of that, there's been 1 million dead civilians, in that conflict. 1 million dead, women and children and men. 1 million dead civilians because of a lie that the media perpetuated, saying that there was weapons of mass destruction and all that kind of stuff.
1 million dead Arabs as well.
1 million dead Arabs, yeah. 1 million dead Arabs.
Who were dehumanized.
They were dehumanized, and, when the pictures came out from the prison, the Al Ghraib prison, where, they were electrocuting them and torturing them, and, again, just completely dehumanized. This is the reality of the media. The media can... like Martin Luther King said, I think it was Martin Luther King.
Malcolm X.
Malcolm
can
X.
Have you loving.
Yeah.
Your
media will make you believe that the good guys are like the bad guys, and the bad guys are the good guys. Yeah. Look, I think even that is problematic sometimes, because there's no good guys and there's no bad, because there's no perfect victim, and we also need to get that framing correct. Because when we look at, say, people in Gaza, if they're a child, people have a bit more sympathy. But if they're a man, they don't have the same level of sympathy. But you can't be the perfect victim. That man's crime might just be the fact that he's a man. He could just be the local baker or a teacher, or, do you know what I mean? He had nothing to do...
Poets, gardeners.
Poets, he could have nothing to do with, like, any militants or anything like that. But that's the reality, is they you need to be a perfect victim. So when Palestinians protest... and all the protesters, when they protest and they, destroy a window or anything like that, all of a sudden these protests are now become illegal because they've caused disruption. You need to be the perfect protesters. But the whole idea of a protest is disruption. You've got to cause disruption. That's what a protest is.
Otherwise, it's a picnic.
Otherwise, it's a picnic, yeah. So, again, we've got to change the narrative from good guys and bad guys, because the bad guys, even in your world, could do good things. And the good guys could do bad things as well, and we can't be so black and white about it. We have to focus on the humanity, because once you focus on the humanity, right, you stop being in these tents and on these sides where, like, your side can do no wrong and this side, all they can do is wrong. When you just look at the humanity side of things, it changes how you view the conflict. And if you were to focus on the humanity side of things, the humanity that we need to focus on is the Palestinian humanity, because that's what's being lost in this war and in this conflict.
There has to be some degree of accountability, though.
You know,
there has to be.
There will be accountability. You know, I have no doubt that there will be a day of reckoning and there will be accountability. What we have to do is we have to stop those people dying. Otherwise,
you're saying there's an urgency here, that there's a step that has to happen first, and then another step.
You know, people keep talking about, oh, you know, we can't let them displace the people of Gaza. Let's stop talking about that. Let's just actually talk about keeping them alive, so they don't, you know, and then we could talk about not displacing them. But if they all die from starvation and bombing, then it's lost anyway. So, you know, people always get caught up in the political side of things. We just need to focus on that humanity. We need to stop them dying, and then we can rebuild
them
their
being
lives.
Killed. Don't do the passive media thing, Dr. Mo.
Yeah. Stop them. Well, you know what I mean when I say stop them. Like,
stop killing them.
They need to stop being killed. They need to stop being murdered. All right. They need to stop being starved to death. When that stops, then we can talk about things like rebuilding Gaza and all that kind of stuff. But the focus has to be on the immediate humanitarian situation. We need to focus on their humanity. And once we focus on their humanity, because you think about it, right? Yeah. If we were to say these children, we need to, you know, as a country, we need to take some of these children into to begin to do medical care and heal them. These children come here, they begin to tell their stories. They begin to be part of our community, right? Their families, they interact with other children. All of a sudden, the noise that you hear that they're just human shields or they're all complicit in October the 7th, all that kind of stuff, it disappears because we begin to see their humanity and we rehumanize them. And that gives us a W. And then it gets on to the next W where it goes, well, actually, they're not bad. And, you know, they're human beings like us, and they want their kids to be educated, and they have birthday parties, and they like, you know, and once you humanize them, you start getting some W's on the board, and things begin then to move forward. But if we can't even agree on whether children are starving to death in Gaza, because that's where the conversation is. You know, it's focused on, you know, you're saying, oh, they're starving to death. The other side is saying, no, there's no starvation. If we can't even agree whether a child is starving to death, how are we going to feed them? So we just need to, or what I want to do as a doctor and a humanitarian aid worker, I want to rehumanize them and focus on the humanity of them, rather than talking about all the politics of it and everything else. But to humanize them, obviously we need to bring in the language that's being used, the framing that's being used. But all of this comes with humanizing them, because once you humanize them, you can't get away with framing it in a different way. You can't get away with framing it in a passive tone. You can't frame it in a way where one side is always good and the other side is always bad. So, and that's incumbent on our side as well, to frame it better as well, even from the pro-Palestinian side, is to frame it better, because, you know, there's humanity on the other side as well, you know, that you need to humanize the other side as well. And when a genocide is being committed, it's both sides that lose their humanity, because to do that to a group of people, you have to lose your own humanity in the process to do that to another group of human beings. So we need to humanize. We need to humanize everyone. The other side and that side both need to be humanized. The emphasis obviously is going to be more on humanizing those that are being killed en masse, and those children. And
systematically deprived and materially deprived of their humanity. Exactly. It's funny because you keep talking about framing as a way to, humanize Palestinians. I mean, I think you have to think of Palestinians as less than fully human in order to use that sort of passive language, because there's no way that sort of passive language was used if it was happening to a white person or if it was happening to, you know, somebody that you know and somebody that you love. That it would be a travesty, hands down, and treated as such. So in a sense, it's like you need to believe in the humanity of Palestinians to frame it correctly, but you also need to frame it correctly to humanize them. And so it's this kind of which comes first? How do you do it? It's this really kind of terrible a circular motion that you need to kind of find a circuit breaker to get into to start doing that.
And I think the circuit breaker is, you know, we approach the humanitarian situation, we build hospitals, we bring children here that need to be treated, and we get them in front of the camera. The Western journalists aren't allowed into Gaza, and because of that, you can't, there's no reporting, there's no stories from a Western lens to show the humanity of these people.
I mean, not that I have some difficulty with the fact that a Western lens is required to show the humanity.
But that's the reality
of these people.
That's the reality. That's the reality, though. That's the reality. When you're invested in the Palestinian cause, the journalists on the ground do an amazing job humanizing them and showing you their aspirations and their dreams, and it's very touching. But to the average layman, they need to be humanized from a Western lens, and
that speaks to a lot of the colonial eye, the presumption that they are not my equal. Please make them my equal. I need to see them as my equal via a person that I believe is my equal. I mean, that whole ecosystem.
But
problematic.
The thing is I have a different perspective, and the reason is because I've watched these children die.
Yeah.
And I've been the one that's had them bleed out while I'm holding them. There's more of an urgency that I have. People can sit back and be like, oh, it's colonialism and white privilege and these are the things and down with the system. And I'm like, yeah, cool. But I just want them to stop dying. And in order to do that, we need to get some W's on the board. And let's get some W's by trying to do something that everyone can agree on, which is feeding children, which is treating the kids, which is providing food. And these things, once you start getting one W, you'll slowly begin the rehumanization process. Because remember, in order to commit a genocide, you don't go from zero to genocide overnight.
Yeah.
This takes years to dehumanize. It's taken 75 years to dehumanize these Palestinians to a point of where a genocide has become acceptable. So it's not gonna happen overnight.
Yeah.
And that's the reality. But right now, I just want them to stop dying first, and then we can rehumanize them properly and talk about the systems of oppression and everything like that. Then all these social justice, worries, and I love it. You know what I mean? I'm all for it. But
I think you have such a particular perspective because you were there.
Yeah,
and you spent time there, and you are a doctor, you were a physician, you were in the eye of the storm, so to speak, to use that phrase. And I'm not. I'm here on this couch. And I think maybe it is, easy for me to say X, Y, and Z. And I will not have the clarity that you have from having been there.
Yeah. Well,
so I can understand why
we don't even have thermometers there.
Of urgency.
We didn't even have thermometers there. We didn't even have thermometers to measure people's temperature.
No.
Right. I just want that kind of people to understand that reality. So people can talk about structures of power and it's great and I get it. But if I don't even have a thermometer to measure a child's temperature, where am I going to start? Where am I going to stop? Where can I start saving their lives? And what we need to focus on is you need to focus on getting some W's. And those W's include saving children's lives.
All right, tell me the W's. What are the W's in the wins? What are they in your eyes?
The wins is we've got to. I know that humanitarian aid is getting, but the thing is we've got to. One is the framing of it, where we at least frame that they're being killed, and murdered and slaughtered, and then the other thing is we've got to have better ways of delivering humanitarian aid to them and of treating these people. And one of it is our government, they give more money to say like, UNICEF and charities like that work on the ground. But there's no tangible, we can't say that the money that Australia gave fed this particular group of people, right? It just goes into the machine.
Yeah, it's very hard to know exactly.
It's very hard to know. And that's what kind of brings the temperature up in the country because, the government will say we're doing something and people are like, well, what are you doing? I can't see the things. So obviously what I'm coming and campaigning for is I want there to be a field hospital, an Australian field hospital in Gaza. Now, I know that comes with the logistical nightmares, but I feel like if we can get that political will, because then we have Australian doctors working in Gaza, working with Australian medical equipment, the Australian government doing something. And then when we see a child who, comes in and is got shrapnel in his eyes and we have a ophthalmology surgeon who comes in and removes it and the kid can see again, that's a tangible difference. That's something that we see that the Australian government has done. If we then, are bringing in these children to Australia to be treated and they're making the visa process and the retrieval of these people more streamlined, and we're getting them treated, that then also shows tangible benefits. And that brings down the temperature, because then people can't say, well, the Australian government's doing nothing. We're doing things. And one of the things is
right.
Say like Australian NGOs, we have small Australian NGOs that aren't the Red Cross or UNICEF, but we have like things like Panzima, the organization that I went in with. You could fund them, and they can bring in more doctors into Gaza with better medical equipment, and actually...
I mean, you're saying that surgeons are just prevented from entering just willy-nilly, no reasons given. You can't come in.
We have leverage. We have leverage.
Right.
When the Israelis killed Zomi, right, who was working for World Central Kitchen feeding kids in Gaza, no justice has come for her yet. And, we can get more Australian aid workers in and have them protected because of what they did to one of our own. And we need to hold them accountable to that. And holding them accountable means honouring her legacy, which is aid work and humanitarian work. And, if we don't have the political will to do that and the mandate to do that, then, it's going to be a bit of an uphill struggle to get all of these things done. But
do you think that there is a political will? Let's talk about the field hospital. You want an Australian field hospital in Gaza.
Yeah.
How do you think that is probable?
I've got to believe.
Possible?
I've got to believe there's a political will to do it. I've got to believe.
Are you getting a sense that there is?
I'm getting a sense that there is. I'm getting a sense that hands are tied. But I'm getting a sense that there is.
Hands are tied by.
Well, hands are tied because
in
Australia.
what way?
Australia can't dictate what happens in the Middle East, right? So our hands are tied from that point of view, but we can work with other nations, with other smaller nations, and have a bigger voice. We can coordinate and work together. There's other ways in which we can do this, and it's about perseverance, and it's about will. How much are we going to persevere to do this? And one of the aid workers has got to stand up and say something. And I've taken that, I've taken that mantle on, which is, let's campaign. We have one of our fallen aid workers who died in Gaza. All the other aid workers that have been there, let's band together. Let's band together as healthcare professionals, and let's demand this. And let's create a thing where no one can argue with it. Doesn't matter which side of the spectrum you're on. We want a children's hospital in Gaza. Do you have a problem with that? Do you have a problem with that, with a kids' hospital? Really? A kids' hospital? Is that politically hard for you to handle? Now, there might be some logistical, things, but that's for the government's job to sort out the logistics. But what we've got to demand is something that no one can really argue with. Treating sick children, that's something that you can't argue with. So
and you'd be surprised.
Yeah, well, they can argue with it. You can say 2 + 2 is 4, and someone will tell you, no, it's not, it's 5. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? But in principle, there shouldn't be any argument over whether we
save the lives of children.
There shouldn't be any arguments over that. And if somebody does, that just shows who they are. And I think most reasonable people, no matter which side of the argument, can't make an argument for that. And that's what I mean about we need to start getting some W's. We need to start pushing for things that aren't necessarily controversial. Because look, whatever you do is controversial. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? When I was in Gaza, I put up a picture of me eating a Snickers, right? And I got a whole lot, well, it wasn't me that saw these, but I got a whole lot of messages of people saying, that's on the boycott list. Why are you eating Snickers? And I remember just thinking, guys, there's no food that's got into Gaza for weeks. I'm eating what I can. And I found a Snickers, so I'm going to eat a Snickers. Do you know what I mean? Do you want me to start boycotting from within Gaza? These people don't have the option to pick and choose what food they buy. But so it doesn't matter. Even the pro-Palestinian side are going to have problems. Do you know what I mean? Or why is it just a small field hospital? Why are we not bringing them here to be treated? Do they just have to be treated in this hospital that doesn't have the best medical equipment? Everyone will complain, but it's about cutting through the noise and getting a W. And the W is that we keep some children alive.
Right.
That's what I want. I want to keep kids alive. It's not difficult what I want. I want to keep these kids alive because when you see so many of them die, right? I don't care about the politics of it all. I want to focus on...
I guess that's your lane, That's what you do. You keep people alive.
Yes.
You keep children
alive. And I want
alive.
to keep them alive.
But the question is, right, okay, well, let's say they're kept alive.
Yeah.
What then?
Well, then
So that's the question that other people are exploring.
Then the other people,
terms of
the other people can deal with that.
Yeah.
They can deal with that. They can, once I've kept them alive and looked after them medically, then you can deal with where they live. You can deal with rebuilding Gaza. You can deal with rehumanizing them and whatnot. But I need to keep them alive. Otherwise, what Gaza is there to rebuild if there's no one left there? You know what I mean? So people need to let us or support us in getting this W, in getting them, in helping to keep these people alive. Because once we do that, then everything else will come. But we've got to keep the first step, which is to stop these people dying, being killed, murdered, whatever you want. I don't even care about the words that you use. I just want them to stay alive, because when you have children being urinated on as they're taking their last breaths,
I hate you just describing that, to be honest, because I feel like I'm torn so much. I very rarely share the awful images. I see them all, but I very rarely share them.
Yeah.
And part of the reason that I very rarely share them, even though I want all of the world to see them and be moved in the same way that I'm moved, there's a certain dehumanization that comes from seeing Palestinians only as bodies and as victims and as,
and that's valid. That's a valid.
They're more than that.
That's a valid point to make, and it is valid, and I totally get that. But at the same time, it's also the reality.
Yeah.
So, your point of view is valid. My point of view is valid by sharing the reality of what's going on. Your point of view is valid by not wanting this to be their image.
Yeah.
Both totally valid. But we have to keep them alive.
Yeah.
Right? So we can't keep sitting here and arguing about, you're eating a Snickers and that's on the boycott list while I'm in Gaza. Do you know what I mean? Or don't show images of them because, it further dehumanizes them. Guys, let's just get a win. Let's just keep them alive, right? I don't care if I have to put an Israeli flag over the hospital, right, and call it Benjamin Netanyahu's pediatric center, right? Yeah, let's keep these kids alive, like, and that's, I think, what people lose the reality of. They want things to be so, and again, this comes back, the perfect victim, the perfect oppressor. No one is perfect on either side, right? Yeah, but it's about chewing through the middle and getting results, getting things done. And that's what I want to do, because I have seen those children die. I've seen them in those tents with maggots eating their wounds and slowly dying. And I can feel the urgency of this. I mean, once you go over there and you come back, it cuts through all the bullshit. You know what I mean? These are real people suffering and dying, and I need to stop them. So I don't care how we get the win. I don't care how we get the hospital, but I'm going to keep fighting to get that hospital in Gaza. And once I get that hospital in Gaza, then maybe then I can get more than 3 hours sleep, you know what I mean, in the night. But right now, I'm going 100% for those children, and that's what we need to do.
I can't argue with that, Dr. Mo.
Yeah.
I can't argue with it.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe that's a great place to end this conversation.
Yeah.
Even though I could talk to you for ages.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
I appreciate you for having me.
And I also really appreciate the work that you do. I'm sorry. I'm trying not to get visibly upset again.
Yeah.
It's just quite a lot to process.
Yeah.
But at least you're over there. You're putting your money where your mouth is, so to speak.
Yeah. I've given up a lot for this cause. I don't want to talk about how much I've given up, but I'm just desperate to get some results. I'm desperate to get a W, and I put my life on the line twice. I've given up so much financially, in my career, everything for these people, and I still get criticized, and I still get death threats, all the rest of it. But I just want to get that W for those kids. I want to get them a W. I want to keep them alive, and then and then someone else can take the baton. After I've kept them alive, you can take the baton and you can get a free Palestine, and maybe I can, get some sleep.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
That was my chat with Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, aka Dr. Mo, aka Beast from the Middle East. If you've gotten right through that chat and you're here, I wish I had some words for you other than I love you very much. And there's a lot of people out there who are feeling exactly what it is that you are feeling too. So I hope at the very least that makes you feel less alone. It seems a bit off to ask you to like and subscribe, doesn't it? It does. It does. So, yeah, I'm not going to do it. I think you should put your phone down, put your laptop down, put your iPad down, whatever it is, and if you can, make yourself a nice cup of tea and just sit down for a bit. Catch you next time.